Welcome to the Eat Away Kidney Stones podcast. I'm your host, registered dietitian and kidney stone expert, Melanie. After learning a ton about kidney stones and helping people prevent stones at the University of Chicago, I was fed up with all the terrible advice people were finding online. So I decided to do something about it. The Kidney Dietitian was born. This podcast is for people who want to learn what actually works to prevent kidney stones and still enjoy life, eating, and their favorite foods. Let's dive in. Hello, and welcome to the 55th episode of the Eat Away Kidney Stones podcast. Today, we have yet another very, very special guest. I am so excited to introduce my colleague and friend, Edith Yang, to the podcast. Edith, why don't you just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about you and what you do and where you're from.
Hi, Melanie. Thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited to be on this podcast, super honored to be a guest on this podcast, actually. A little bit about me. So I'm a Chinese American. I was actually born in the United States. I'm a registered dietitian that specializes in kidney disease and also working with other chronic diseases. I have been a dietitian for over 10 years. Right now, I'm working in an insurance-based private practice, where I just help people from all walks of life with all these different health conditions. And I actually grew up all over the United States. I was born on the East Coast. I lived in the South for a few years, and then now I'm settled on the West Coast. And I probably will stay here. I live in Southern California, and the weather
Pretty
is
nice
just
there.
pretty nice most of the time, although this past year was a little funky. But there's so much good food, lots of different cultures, diversity, all of that good stuff here. So we're probably going to stay here, but love to travel and want to go visit more parts of the United States.
I didn't know that. Where on the East Coast did you grow up?
I was born in New Jersey, and then we didn't stay there for that long. I pretty much like after a year or two, I moved down to Louisiana.
Oh, Louisiana.
Yeah,
Like
that was
New
fun.
Orleans or different Louisiana?
Like kind of close to New
Okay.
Orleans. Yeah, like I
Speaking of good
remember.
food.
Yeah,
Yeah.
lots of good food, fun times. I remember Mardi Gras, but not like what people as adults think of Mardi
Yeah.
Gras, just like the fun side of Mardi Gras.
Very cool. Yeah, I didn't know that. You just need to move then to the Midwest. That's kind of the only piece of the country that you've missed out on. You need to come hang out in Chicago for a couple of years.
Right, I should. My cousin is settled out there, so I'm like,
Oh,
maybe I
nice.
could go visit.
Yeah, awesome. Awesome. All right, so kind of all over the place. And you mentioned kind of going with the topic of today's podcast of kind of cultural foods, specifically Chinese foods in any sort of kidney-friendly diet. You said that you identify as Chinese American, yet were born in the United States. So kind of like, were your parents born in China? Kind of give us some background in terms of your heritage.
Yeah, so my parents actually were born and raised in Taiwan. But I think like if we trace back, like my grandparent or on my dad's side, my grandparents were from China.
Okay.
So but then now I think most of my whole life was in the United States. Most of
Yeah.
their life now has kind of settled over here. But definitely as far as food goes, like I think I got a good blend of both cultures just from growing up here, right? You know, attending school, having friends from America, the American diet, and then, but at home, kind of, parents more prefer the Chinese foods.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. So speaking like kind of stepping back and thinking from a big, nutrition dietitian standpoint, why do we think that it's so important to include quote cultural foods in someone's diet? Like I feel like at least in, when I'm hanging out with dietitians and when I'm in continuing education stuff, I feel like people talk about this like cultural foods and it's so like it's almost like this catchphrase, but like real talk, like why is it so important for people to include their cultural foods in their life?
Yeah, I think like food, right? It's such a big part of our lives, whether just from like social aspect or like cultural aspect, right? We celebrate with food. When we hang out with people, it's like, where do you want to eat or what food do you want to
Mhm.
have, right? You go to people's houses and, people are offering you food, right? So food is just such a big part of our lives. And I think like with nutrition therapy counseling, right? When we're trying to teach people to eat well, but if we're not telling them about how we can make their own foods like more nutritious or balanced for whatever condition or whatever, thing that they're trying to work on, they're not going to really know like what to do with the information that we're trying to give them, right? So if I like for a Chinese person, right, we do eat a lot of like noodles and rice, but if I tell them like, oh, let's go have quinoa and like white bread, they're gonna or bread of some sort, right? They might look at me and just be like, but I don't
That's not what
eat
I
that.
eat.
Yeah, that's not what I eat. Like I don't understand. Um, and then another side of it is like when I'm counseling patients, like if you don't understand too, like a culture and how like their norms and values and how they approach things, right? Like if I wasn't Chinese and I was counseling someone, but I didn't know that maybe a Chinese person is a little more soft-spoken or that they have this high respect for healthcare providers, they may not like let you know. They may just say like, okay,
Okay,
the
I have to
doctor,
eat quinoa now.
yeah, I have to do this
Hmm.
now, so I'm going to
Yeah.
do it. I'm going to try, but might not be something I enjoy or might not be something I know what to do with. And so, the patients can get very confused and lost and then end up unhappy. So I think that like having that cultural approach is a much
Hmm.
better way to help people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's just going to make like your advice or going to be so much more relevant to their lives, right? Like they're going to be able to do this forever. Because sure, maybe that person says, okay, I'm going to try quinoa. They try it for 2 meals. They're like, nope, this is not going to work. And they're, of course, going to go back to what they were doing. So it's just so, so important to make sure that whenever dietitians are working with someone that it is relevant to whatever they eat, whether it's culturally or religiously or like whatever we're talking about, right? There's so many different aspects to food because I say all the time, like food is just such a crucial part of your life. And if you're getting advice, whether it be from a dietitian or someone on Instagram that's like saying you can never have XYZ, like that's kind of a red flag in my mind.
I totally agree. I get so frustrated. Even like my husband, sometimes he'll be like, oh, he's yesterday actually, he just showed me a picture. Someone had created a chart about oils, and they're like sunflower oil, something bad with it,
Uh-huh. Seed
safflower oil,
oils.
really, yeah,
Yeah.
all the seed oils like really bad. And he's like, see, look at this. And I'm like, what? Like what? What are you trying to tell me? I'm like, this doesn't mean anything. He's like, but it's red. And I'm like, they just colored it red.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with it. But yeah, we definitely need to take that approach.
Hmm.
When also promoting things like My Plate too, I think like sometimes that My Plate, I think it's a really great education. But how to apply it for different cultures is like a whole nother
It's
thing.
missing. Oh,
Yeah, it's
yeah.
it's missing. Yeah, it's not
Hmm.
quite there. We can definitely modify it. Like I've done that on my blog. Like I kind of wrote about how to build that healthy plate. But like referencing instead of like typical American diet foods, kind of referencing Asian or Chinese foods and how you can kind of apply the same idea, but on, with the cultural foods.
Hmm. Yeah. I feel like that's such a huge, we could probably talk for hours about just how big of an issue it is, kind of this whitewashed version of what a healthy diet looks like. And I think it's probably partially dietitians' fault slash the dietary guidelines for Americans, right? Like I think the latest version I think is better, but like there's still a lot of room to grow in terms of incorporating those very, very healthy ethnic foods from all cultures. Because I feel like there's this so we've sort of been part of the problem, but also I think the influencer culture that we live in where you've got Gwyneth Paltrow telling you to eat lemon juice and whatever like right and just a lot of sort of that's a whole nother issue. That's a whole nother tangent, but like just like we live in this world both from the dietary guidelines for Americans and dietitians and also from people on Instagram telling us that we have to eat these certain foods. And there's these like quote superfoods. I'm putting this in air quotes for those of you that can't see me right now. And they're all like there's no superfood, right? No one has to eat certain foods. And I feel like the foods that have been elevated are very sort of stereotypical like middle class white American foods, right? Like kale or quinoa or chia seeds or I don't know, what am I missing? Like, these types of foods and you do not have to eat those foods. I think in every single culture there are very, very nutritious foods and honestly, probably a whole lot healthier than sort of our typical American diet that we just need to help people understand that you can prepare them in a more kiddie friendly way, you know?
Yeah, definitely agree. Like patients too come to me and the first thing they'll say is like, tell me what to eat. I
Hmm.
think they just want me to give them like a list or something, but I instead am like, Wait, tell me what you eat first. Like, tell me
Hmm.
what kind of foods do you like? How do you eat? And like your daily lives too. And I kind of take that into consideration versus just, okay, yeah, the quote unquote superfoods. Here you go. Here's the list. Like, I think people think that they want that, but in the end, right,
It doesn't
applying
work.
it, yeah, it doesn't work like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I get, people will often ask, can I have XYZ food? And my answer is always absolutely. But, I need to know, that's the benefit of working with a dietitian is that that dietitian is going to take your food preferences and cultural preferences and eating styles and medical history, right? Like everything is different. I say all the time, there's no one kidney stone diet, there's no one kidney disease diet. So we have to look at your medical history as well as your preferences. Like there's so many things that would go into my advice for you and that food. I simply cannot do it from someone that messages me on Instagram that I know nothing about. you know.
Right. Right. Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. So I get a lot of questions actually about different Asian foods. I feel like Thai comes up quite a bit, and Thai and Chinese. Um, how can I make these foods healthy? Because they are delicious foods. I love Chinese and Thai food myself. And I think that there are a lot of aspects of those cultural foods that are actually very kidney friendly. So what things kind of come to your mind that you would want to elevate in sort of those traditional cultural practices?
I think like all the foods, like you're saying, are like healthy and nutritious. So
Mhm.
sometimes when people approach me in that way, because I get those same questions too, like, oh, I really like Chinese food. And they say it with this like negative tone. And then I just ask them, like, well, why? Like, why do you think it's unhealthy? Like, what's
Mhm.
wrong with it?
Yeah,
Right. And a lot of times maybe like sodium comes up, MSG comes up, maybe some of the ingredients or like the oils. I think that maybe they're referring to possibly like, restaurants, which I don't think that that only applies to like Asian restaurants, like any restaurant, right? They're going to
so
be
true.
using maybe
Yes,
whatever oil is more affordable for their company and whatever is going to elevate the taste of food, right? So they're going to put tons of sodium and tons of oils and whatever, right? Because they're selling their food and they want it to taste
makes it
good. So
delicious.
yeah, so there's
Yeah.
nothing really like for me, I don't feel that there's any food in Chinese culture, specific Chinese or any Asian culture that's like really bad. I think the one thing though is the fruit, a star fruit, that the
Oh,
kidney people with kidney disease or can't have that. And I know in Asian cultures that does come up. But as far as like meals, recipes, things like that, there really isn't anything. Like they use a lot of vegetables, like stir fries, right? Those tend to have like onions, bell peppers, whatever veggies.
mushrooms. Mhm.
If you walk, yeah, mushrooms. If you walk into an Asian grocery store, like you'll see tons of produce and they have a lot of vegetables that are dark and leafy green, right? Which got so much good nutrition in them. So
Mhm.
they've also got a lot of root vegetables, which are high in fiber, potassium, lots of good nutrients there.
Mhm.
So there really isn't anything. The only thing I think for Chinese culture is that pork is heavily used. So maybe, for someone who may need to limit or avoid that red meat, that might be something that I would modify. But again, like you said, not necessarily saying you can't have it, but let's talk about it. Let's talk about what do you like about it? How often are you having it? What can we do to maybe like lessen it if we need to? But if not, I'll teach you how you can eat it and still enjoy it and not feel guilty. Like,
Yeah,
don't
absolutely.
feel bad.
And honestly, I often recommend for people who are very heavy meat eaters, who are, sort of your traditional meat and potato type person, I think that putting meat like pork or chicken or whatever meat in a stir fry is a really great way to kind of end up eating less, right? Like you can make that little bit of pork go a lot further if you mix it up with a whole bunch of vegetables and rice, as opposed to just like having a pork chop. So that's actually something that I often recommend to people who are trying to eat less meat anyway, right?
Right. Yeah. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. We can
No.
find the ways to help you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think another really obvious great kidney friendly option in uh Chinese and Asian cultures is tofu, right? That's a really
Yes.
right. You want to talk a little bit about tofu?
I love tofu so much. It's such a versatile protein. It basically doesn't taste like much like on its own, but that makes it such a great food to use in a lot of dishes because then it can take on the flavors and textures of kind of whatever dish that you're trying to mimic. And so like even in pork dishes, I will say like add some like cut lessen maybe the load of the animal portion part and then bulk it up with some protein from tofu.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's another great way. There's the tofu, like the blocks, there's the silken, there's the firm, there's edamame beans. There's
There's
just
so
so
many.
many.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's so many fun ways to use it. Like, I feel like I learn something every day, like making the tofu scramble in place of eggs or like frying the tofu. You can like press it and it becomes a texture similar to meat, right? Like, there's so many different fun ways that you can use it.
Yeah, I use it in smoothies, mix it like yeah, as a protein re or animal
Mhm.
protein
And
replacement.
it probably makes it nice and creamy. I've never done that, but that would be interesting.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
also for Asian dishes, sometimes we just have it as a block cut
Hmm.
into kind of cubes and then kind of drizzling whatever sauce. I love spice, so I'll do like a spicy peanut sauce or a sesame sauce on it, a little bit of soy sauce, which is okay for kidney disease. So just yeah, there's just so many fun ways to use tofu.
Yeah, yeah. Are there other sort of meat replacement foods that I'm completely missing that are common in Asian cultures other than tofu?
I think tofu's the biggest one. They also do use seitan, but I
Mm-hmm.
don't think that they refer to it as that, but that's also another type
Mm-hmm.
of protein that can be used. Beans are actually also in Chinese dishes. Like sometimes there's a pork rib with a black bean.
Yeah.
They use like mung bean, there's mung bean noodles, red bean. Most of the so like mung bean as far aside from the noodles usage, I think I see that a lot in like desserts and things, but I
Mhm.
kind of have been maybe pushing some boundaries a little bit by suggesting to my Asian patients like, well, why does it only have to be sweet? Why can't it be in something else too, right? Because
Yeah.
also the bean will just take on the flavor, right, of whatever you're putting it into. So let's try using those as well.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Um, what does a mung bean taste like? I honestly am not sure I've ever had it, embarrassingly.
So it's kind of it's a green bean, which it might have been referred to as a green bean, but it's just
Okay.
kind of smaller
Yeah.
than like compared to like the beans that we see in the American like or canned beans and things like that or dried beans. But very similar to I would say like a black bean. It's very
Hmm.
mild in flavor, so nothing like too
So it
strong. And
could
again,
take on whatever flavor to, like you said, of what you're
right.
cooking it in. Yeah.
Yeah. Have you had Vietnamese food?
Oh, yes, definitely. I
Okay, so
live
some
very close to a Vietnamese community, like part of Chicago. So, yes, I had banh mi actually just yesterday.
okay, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think some of the noodles too used in like some of that could
Okay.
be a vermicelli noodle or a mung bean noodle.
Yeah. So maybe I've had it and
Sometimes.
I just don't even realize, or I've
Maybe,
forgotten.
maybe, yeah.
This is a kidney stone podcast, and so I know that those foods will make a lot of people sweat a little bit because they are higher in oxalate. But I just want to reiterate, like I always do, that I really do not advocate for a low oxalate diet for kidney stone prevention. I have tons of other podcasts about that because we know that eating a lot of animal protein, just like kidney disease, is associated with worse outcomes. Eating a lot of animal protein can make kidney disease worse, and it also can cause kidney stones. And so, even though something is higher in oxalate, as long as it's in a well balanced diet that includes enough calcium, it is completely okay to have for the vast majority of people. And so, just because you have kidney stones is not a reason to shy away from tofu and beans. In fact, they probably have a lot of really good things in them that would actually be helpful for kidney stone prevention. So, had to mention that since tofu came up. We talked about
Yes,
that.
it's yes. I love that you mentioned that though, because people need to know and they need to
Hmm.
hear it over and over again. We got to be friends with all foods.
Yes, absolutely. Especially ones that are so good for us, right? Just because beans are higher in oxalate or potassium or phosphorus, these things are not necessarily bioavailable, thinking about it from a potassium and phosphorus standpoint. And they have a lot of things in them that are really actually very good for our kidneys. And so we want to be including these plant foods that have historically been sort of ostracized for a wide variety of reasons. So I think that it's impossible to have a conversation about Chinese food without talking about salt, because I think that is often the biggest concern on any kidney-friendly diet, is sodium. So what would you say about that? Is it possible to have any type of Asian food while on a kidney-friendly diet when you're watching sodium?
Absolutely. This is like such a big question, such a big thing. Like, so in my practice too, one of the things is I do kind of market towards helping kind of people of Asian background, just because there is such a lack of that diversity and the education for kind of cultural nutrition. But when people come to me, it's like they've cut out everything. They just cut out all sodium and then, soy sauce, right? They're like, oh no, it's too much salt. I can't have it. Any of the sauces and seasonings, actually, they just kind of completely leave out. And again, my question always is like, why? Tell me
Hmm.
why. I ask that not to like make them feel bad about what they're saying, but just to I want to know like what is your reasoning behind it? And then I want to be able to provide that like education and evidence back to like let them know like why is it also okay, and why do you maybe you still need sodium, right? Even following a kidney friendly diet, we still need sodium in our lives. So with
Yeah.
Chinese food, I think people just automatically think soy sauce, that's really high in sodium. I think in like a standard soy sauce, like not low sodium, just the regular, I think 1 tablespoon has like 800 to 1,000 milligrams of sodium, which sounds like a lot. But if you think about it, if I'm using a tablespoon in an entire recipe, I'm not eating the whole thing normally, or in most cases, right? You're not eating the whole entire dish. You're probably eating less of that. If you choose the low sodium soy sauces, the sodium content is even less, right? Maybe I think I've seen like between 500 and 800 milligrams of sodium per tablespoon. So there are ways to, you can still have like low sodium doesn't mean no
No
flavor
sodium.
or no
Or
sodium.
certainly
Yeah.
no flavor.
Right. Yeah. It
Yes.
doesn't mean that. So, I tell my patients, like, again, tell me what you like to eat. One thing that I also do now is when I'm like browsing the grocery stores, I'll make sure like taking pictures of things so that I can also show the patients, like, hey, you can have these things. Like, let me show you, let me teach you, let me educate you and show you how you can. And also explain to you why you still need sodium and why it's okay and how it's not going to be harming your body
Mhm.
when you do have some.
Yeah. I think that's so true of anything, any like nutrient that we talk about on the kidney friendly diet. I feel like people feel so lost because doctors often will say, all right, we have got to stop eating sodium and protein and potassium and phosphorus. And they're like, okay, so what in the world am I supposed
Mm.
to eat? And the
Right.
goal for anything is never zero. Like, never, ever, ever, ever is the goal zero. You need some protein, you need some sodium. Potassium and phosphorus is a whole nother conversation. But you need some of those things as well. And so it's really so important to make sure you learn what your goals are for the whole day. And you can and should include some of these higher sodium things that's going to make your food taste good. There's totally room to do that, especially if you're cooking from scratch, right? Like fruits, vegetables, tofu, pork has very, very little sodium. And then you're adding that flavor using those higher sodium ingredients sparingly, knowing that they do add some sodium.
Right, exactly. So yeah, there's definitely so many ways. Like, so know everybody that's listening that you can eat your favorite foods and have it still taste good.
Yes, please. We want your food to taste good. I think most dietitians are foodies at heart, and so we want your food to taste good.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah.
And when you're talking, speaking of that too, I just want to add, like, when you're talking to your dietitian or healthcare provider, like, let them know, like, talk to us. Like, we want to be able to help you and let us know what you want. Um, it's okay. Like, we can help you find a way. And if not, there's other substitutions that we might have suggestions for. So just let us know what you like
Yeah.
to eat.
Yeah, we're here to work with you. Dietitians do not want to just give you a list of foods. We
Yeah,
want to work with you to find something that you will enjoy because one, that'll make it more enjoyable for you. And also you're going to be way more likely to stick to it. Like the quinoa example. If you don't like quinoa, you don't have to eat quinoa. And no dietitian is telling you that you need to eat quinoa and kale or whatever it is.
exactly.
Yeah. I'm thinking of going back to the soy sauce. Like all of the sauces, I think would fall into the same conversation. I think soy sauce is like the, sort of the stereotypical one, but like fish sauce, or hoisin sauce, or um, I'm blanking on other ones, but like all of those super, super delicious Asian sauces can add so much flavor, and you really don't need that much. Like, yes, there's a teaspoon, there's a ton in that teaspoon of fish sauce. Fish sauce is super high. But
Yeah,
if you're adding a teaspoon in the whole thing, just like Edith mentioned, it's totally okay, and it will absolutely fit.
exactly. And I think like when treating like a patient from Vietnamese background, like to tell them not, that's like in like a big portion or percentage of their food. So
Hmm.
it's unrealistic to just say, oh, you can't have that.
Hmm.
It's not like that. Just cut the portion, or let's talk about like what else we can do to help add that same flavors
Yeah.
or the same flavor.
Yeah. And another great thing I think about Asian food in general is that there's, other than those super salty sauces, like other really, really flavorful things going on that you can kind of like bump up to make the food taste good, right? So cut down on the sauce a little bit, but bump up the other things like garlic and ginger and lime juice. Right? There's these super delicious things that are completely sodium free that are super common in all of these types of dishes.
Yeah, people I think also tend to forget that there's herbs and
Yeah,
seasonings and right
cilantro.
these
Yeah.
other things that can definitely elevate the flavors of their recipes.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing that I wanted to just touch on is that I feel like in other than Asian cuisine, I feel like there's just sort of this bias or assumption that all ethnic cuisines are unhealthy. Like I'm thinking, when I worked at the University of Chicago, I worked with a lot of people with African American heritage and also Hispanic people. And I feel like even just the way that other healthcare professionals might say, like, oh yeah, they just, they eat a whole bunch of tacos all the time. Well, like, okay, like actually similar to Asian cuisine, there's a ton of really, really, really helpful things about both of those cultures, right? Hispanic people love beans. There's oftentimes a lot of
Mm.
tomatoes and like corn tortillas, like lots of vegetables, peppers, right? Like all of these really, really nutritious foods. We just have to help people learn how to cook them maybe in a little bit more kidney friendly way, just like we've been talking about with all of the Chinese and Asian food.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yes, so many patients here too, like, oh, they eat Mexican food. I'm like, well, what is wrong with that? There is nothing wrong with
Right.
that,
There's
right?
nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just there's this like health halo and this like hierarchy of food. Someone I saw a meme once that said something about like, someone says that they eat bacon all the time. Well, that's bad, but you have your brie and prosciutto and that's like elevated and like not this bad thing. It's like it's the same food essentially. You know what I mean? Both delicious and both completely okay to eat, but like they're both higher in sodium, both higher in saturated fat, both cured meats. Like it's so interesting how our perception of these things really just gives this extra what's the word I'm thinking of? Like I'm better than you almost attitude because I'm eating the prosciutto and not the bacon, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know the word, but like, yeah, I totally understand what you're saying. It's, I think food marketing, right? Like
Yeah.
social media influencers, it's just
Hmm.
making different things like appear in a different way. And, but in the end, it's kind of, they're, like you said, they're both the same thing.
Right,
They're
right,
both pork.
exactly. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Um, the last thing that I wanted to make sure we talked about was MSG because I felt like a topic on, Chinese food would not be complete without MSG because I think that is something that has been talked about for decades as this bad food and it causes headaches and all sorts of things. So what do you think? Is MSG okay for you to eat?
Yes, I think like all things, it's okay in moderation. So I wanted to give a little background about MSG in case people aren't aware, but MSG was first found, I think, in like the 1900s by a Japanese chemist. He found that like the nice flavor of seaweed broth was really delicious. So he kind of wanted to find like what was the component that makes it taste so good. And he identified the umami flavor, which comes from MSG. It's basically glutamate, right? That's responsible for this. And then MSG just means monosodium glutamate. So there's sodium attached to the glutamate. But what happened was, I think, I don't remember when, in the mid 20th century, somebody went to eat Chinese food and just wrote this article saying that they had all these like bad symptoms after eating Chinese food and kind of just blamed it on MSG without really knowing, why, or perhaps maybe there's those racist kind of roots that sparked this. But
Mhm.
since then, people, read that and were just like, oh, MSG is bad. It causes all of these symptoms, but people don't really know like what MSG is, I think, because
Just sodium.
right, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think people realize that there's MSG or glutamate in foods too, that's just naturally occurring. And it's not only used in Chinese foods, it's also in some American processed foods too. I believe there's certain chips that if you read the ingredients list, MSG is on there. But I don't really hear people, saying that they're having the same symptoms
Hmm.
as they do when they go to a restaurant that they feel has the MSG in it.
Hmm. Yeah. I feel like you even hear, people, oh, I like this Chinese restaurant because they don't use MSG. It's like, okay, but like it really is just sodium. It's so interesting how like this one thing kind of took off and now it's this like very well like assumed thing in our culture, like, oh, MSG is bad, it causes all these problems. It puts a food on a health halo, right, when it doesn't have that MSG. And it's like, nope, it actually just has. I didn't know this from this one article from this guy who ate at this one Chinese restaurant who probably, you know, just had a bad day or something, like has nothing to do with that MSG. So yeah, and it's really, I think MSG can actually be a really great tool on a low sodium diet because it does have some sodium in it. It's glutamate and sodium, but it adds that umami flavor. I think mushrooms have it. Right? I feel like that's like the classic
Yeah.
example of what umami is. Is that like it's that
Hmm.
like warming, delicious, satiating, like right, that really warm flavor that you get in like a roasted mushroom. And so when you can use MSG to add to your food to get that really delicious flavor with a whole lot less salt than what you would use if you were just adding salt, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So MSG or the glutamate is also found in, like you said, mushrooms, tomatoes, certain
Mhm.
cheeses, seaweed, right? So
Yeah.
it's in our food and it provides great flavor. So really, there's no research behind like that it's bad or that it
Hmm.
causes all these things. And I think too, like my parents even like, oh, MSG is so bad.
Oh,
They've
really?
even, yeah, they're influenced by this. So like
Yeah.
they're like, oh, we
It's just
can't
so
go
ingrained
there.
in us.
Yeah, it really is. Like they're like, oh, we can't eat at this restaurant. Or, we'll go to a restaurant and then they'll be like, oh, this restaurant had so much MSG in it. I can like taste it on my tongue or whatever. And I'm just like, it's just crazy how, yeah, one person wrote this article, which again, I think it was just based on kind of racism. And
Yeah.
then, but
And
even
then
till
in a
now, it's
racist culture, that really takes off. So,
right,
yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
But like you said, it can be used in it can be included in everyone's diet, but for low sodium, it can definitely be really helpful. So a teaspoon of MSG has about 500 milligrams of sodium. And when you compare that to a teaspoon of salt, which has 2,300 milligrams, that's a pretty big difference.
Yeah. And you're going to get a lot of flavor. Would you say more flavor even than a teaspoon of salt? It's just different flavor, but
I
it's delicious.
I feel like it could be, yeah, maybe different, but also maybe more amplified just because that umami
Mhm.
flavor is so like deep and it can just change a dish. So I encourage, my patients, especially the ones that tend to or had a history of eating like a heavier salt diet.
Mhm.
That's because it's hard for them to kind of like like limit the added salt in their food. So,
Yeah.
we can kind of make those changes by just switching over to a little bit of MSG.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing that just crossed my mind is, when we're thinking about different cultures and how they really do all cultures include very healthy foods. And just like with anyone, it's really just about learning how to build a healthier plate, include more vegetables, et cetera, et cetera. It might be interesting to talk a little bit about sort of what the difference of like a typical American Chinese restaurant is versus like what an actual Chinese diet looks like in China. Um, I watched this was months ago, and I watched a documentary on Netflix called Finding General Tso. Have you seen this?
Oh no, I
It is
haven't.
fascinating. It is about the history of Chinese restaurants in America and like how and why they're so prevalent and why, and also is General Tso's chicken really a thing? Well, I'm not going to ruin it for you in case you want to go watch it. Um, but like it's just super, super interesting about like why this is such a common thing. So, but in there they talk certainly about, the difference between how someone who grew up in America might view what a Chinese diet looks like versus what it actually looks like. So maybe talk a little bit about those differences.
Yeah, there's a pretty big difference between like the Chinese restaurants in America and the Chinese restaurants in China or in other
Hmm.
Asian countries. I think like when we think of Chinese food here, you kind of maybe think like Panda Express, the fast food Chinese restaurants. And some of those foods are like, they do come from dishes from China, but they're not always all really eaten as often as like we think, like orange chicken or like the beef and broccoli, right? The General
Hmm.
Tso's chicken. Those are eaten, but they're not like the main thing. China is really big, and there's actually 8 different distinct cuisines in China. So all the different areas actually kind of eat a little bit of a different style. Like in Sichuan region, they're more like about spicy stuff, but not really a lot of like fried stuff. But there's kind of like a lot of peppercorns and those Sichuan chili peppers and
Hmm.
things like that. But then
Those are the ones that make your tongue tingle.
yeah, the peppercorns. Yeah, they make it
Yeah.
numb, the numbing
Yeah.
spice. But in another region of China, they're kind of less spice, but they're kind of more like, I guess I don't know how to translate this, but more like clear and clean type of eating, but not clean like maybe what we think, but just more like using like light broths and like kind of steaming and
Hmm.
just very, light
Simply
methods.
prepared
Yeah,
things.
simply prepared, light methods of cooking. And there's always a vegetable always included in a lot of the dishes. So it's not like the fried stuff that we're seeing here, but there's just so many different things and a lot of like broths too. I think
Hmm.
soups are a really big thing. So kind of, and those are often used with a lot of vegetables, good flavors and things like that. So hard to like say because every culture or area eats a little bit differently, but it isn't like the fried noodles and always the fried rice. Like there's
And meat.
other
Yeah,
and meat, right?
that's what I think is meat, like the sweet and sour chicken and those types of things. Yeah.
Right, yeah. That's like how they Americanized it so that people in America would kind of, enjoy the flavors. But there's so much more. If you ever come to California, I'll definitely have to take you around to all the
Oh my
different
gosh, I would love to.
Chinese restaurants.
We missed an opportunity. We were
I
together in May of this year at the National Kidney Foundation conference.
I know. Maybe next time, wherever we go, wherever it is next time, we should do like a food tour.
Yes, that would be amazing. Yeah, like I said, I think all dietitians are really just foodies and we just love food. So I love trying different things. I actually, for 6 years, hosted an ethnic dinner club here in Chicago with like just my friends. And for literally 6 years, we only missed like 3 months in that entire time. We tried a different restaurant in Chicago. It was so much fun. And then COVID happened, and that was kind of a natural end because we were kind of running out of restaurants and cuisines to try at that point. But it was so, so fun to just go to all these places that you would never think to go to otherwise and just try different foods. So much fun.
Yeah, that sounds like so. It's such an awesome idea.
Yeah, it was great. We kept track of it. I had like a whole Facebook group. I,
Oh,
had it all very
wow.
organized, of course.
I love it.
Yeah, awesome. All right. So is there any sort of last thoughts that you wanted to share before we end the episode today?
I just want to tell everyone, like, again, kind of reiterating what we've been saying this whole time is like, you can eat your favorite foods. You can incorporate your culture and cuisine into a healthy, kidney-friendly diet. Let your providers know, talk to us, let us know your habits, what you prefer, and how you like to flavor food, and let us help you to modify that so you can kind of still enjoy your foods, have a good quality of life, but still improving kind of your health and well-being. So,
Awesome.
yeah.
Awesome. Great last thoughts. And if people want to reach out and work with you or connect with you, where can they find you, Edith?
So I'm everywhere, most everywhere, as Healthy Mission Dietitian. That's my website, on Instagram, also on TikTok, although I'm not too, I'm old, so I'm not so good with the
I
social
feel the same
media.
way. I'm not on TikTok, but I feel I'm too old.
But feel free to reach out. Again, I'm in an insurance-based private practice, and I do specialize in kidney disease and specialize also in working with people of Chinese background. So feel free to reach out to me anywhere. Yeah, you can find me.
Yeah, awesome. And I'll link to your website and all of that sort of stuff in the show notes of this episode too, so people can easily find you. Um, so with that, I will end this episode of the podcast. But thank you, Edith, so much for joining us. It was so fun chatting with you. I think this is going to be a really, really interesting episode for everyone. And I will see everyone again next time.
Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. For more help with kidney stones, check out my website, www.thekidneydietitian.org. For more personalized help from me, check out my online course, Kidney Stone Nutrition School. VIP enrollment includes help directly from me. I can't wait to see you there and help you prevent kidney stones. Have a great day.